At that fateful family dinner, the air still thick with the aroma of forgotten expectations, my daughter-in-law, Zariah, brazenly called for security. "Get this old pauper away from the table," she declared, her voice slicing through the polite hum of conversation. Oh, the irony! Little did she know, as her perfectly coiffed head turned to command the room, that she was speaking to the very woman who owned the company where she held her esteemed position. The next day, with a quiet, unwavering resolve, I demoted her to dishwasher. I'm so glad you're here to hear this story. Stay with me until the very end, and please, share the city you're watching from. I'm curious to see how far my story travels. I should have recognized the first tremor of trouble the instant my finger pressed the doorbell. Usually, my son, Marcus, would be there, his face lighting up with that warm, familiar smile I'd cherished since his childhood. Instead, it was Zariah who pulled the door open, her impeccably manicured fingers gripping the handle with a possessive air, as if she already owned the very foundations of the house, which, I suppose, she genuinely believed she did. "Oh, you're here," she stated, her voice carrying that distinct, thinly veiled contempt she seemed to reserve solely for me, making me feel like an unwelcome intrusion in my own son's home. I instinctively clutched the small gift bag tighter in my hands. Inside, nestled carefully, was a hand-knitted sweater, a labor of love I'd spent weeks crafting for my grandson, Tommy. "Hello, Zariah," I managed, my voice a little softer than I intended. "I brought something for Tommy's birthday." She made no move to step aside, blocking the entrance completely. Instead, her eyes swept over me in a slow, dismissive appraisal, lingering on my simple black dress. The nicest one I owned, certainly, though clearly not up to her exacting standards. "Marcus is still getting ready. The other guests are already here." "Other guests?" The words hit me with a jolt of surprise. Marcus had called just last week, his voice notably strained, as it always was when Zariah was within earshot, inviting me for what he'd described as a small family dinner to celebrate Tommy's 5th birthday. Once finally permitted entry, the contrast was immediate and jarring. The living room buzzed with impeccably dressed couples, their expensive jewelry glinting under the dazzling light of the crystal chandelier. Their hushed, important tones filled the air, the kind of voices that belonged to people who genuinely believed their every utterance held more weight than anyone else's. I recognized a few faces from the glossy society pages of the local newspaper, the very elite. "Grandma Sherry!" Tommy's innocent voice cut through the adult chatter like a sunbeam piercing storm clouds. He darted towards me, his small arms outstretched, and for a precious moment, the world righted itself. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I whispered, pulling him close, inhaling the sweet scent of birthday cake and pure childhood innocence. "I made you something special." But before I could even reach for the gift, Zariah's hand descended on his shoulder, firm and possessive, gently but firmly pulling him away. "Tommy, remember what we talked about? Grandma needs to wash her hands first. Why don't you go play with your cousins?" The unspoken message hung heavy in the air, undeniable and chilling. I wasn't deemed clean enough to touch her son. And if the initial reception was unwelcoming, dinner proved to be an even greater ordeal. The dining room table stretched out endlessly, laid with pristine china I'd never seen before, likely lavish wedding gifts from Zariah's side of the family. I was relegated to the very far end, awkwardly squeezed between an empty chair and Marcus's college friend, a man who spent the entire meal loudly regaling anyone within earshot about his latest, seemingly monumental, business acquisition. Marcus caught my eye once during the appetizer course. He offered a weak, apologetic smile, a mere flicker of his old self. But then, Zariah leaned in, whispering something sharply into his ear, and just like that, his gaze darted away. My heart, already heavy, sank a little deeper. "So, Sherry," Zariah's voice, suddenly amplified, rang out across the vast table, cutting through the general hum like a bell. During the main course, causing conversations to halt abruptly. "Marcus tells me you're still working at that little cleaning company," she announced, her tone dripping with disdain, making the word little sound utterly distasteful. Several guests pivoted in their seats, their expressions a disquieting blend of pity and curiosity. A flush of heat crept up my neck, staining my cheeks. "I own a business, yes," I replied quietly, a desperate attempt to avoid a scene. Zariah let out a brittle laugh, a sound like ice cubes clinking in a crystal glass. "Oh, how sweet! A business." She then turned to the woman seated beside her, leaning in conspiratorially. "Sherry does office cleaning, very humble work. The woman beside her offered a polite nod, but I caught the almost imperceptible shift in her posture, the subtle way she angled herself slightly away from me. It was a movement I'd witnessed countless times throughout my life, the unconscious recoil people exhibit when they perceive themselves to be in the presence of someone beneath their social station. I tried to eat, but each bite felt like gritty sand in my mouth, impossible to swallow. Around me, conversations flowed freely about lavish vacation homes in the Hamptons, the merits of various private schools, and the intricacies of investment portfolios. I had absolutely nothing to contribute to these high-flying discussions, or rather, nothing they would deem worthy of hearing from someone like me. It was during dessert that everything truly unraveled. Tommy, my sweet grandson, had managed to escape from the children's table and clambered onto my lap, his little fingers smeared with chocolate cake. "Grandma, will you tell me the story about the princess who saved herself?" he whispered, his eyes wide with anticipation. It was our tradition, a story I'd invented years ago about a clever, strong princess who never needed a prince to rescue her. But before I could even begin, Zariah was on her feet, her face a storm of fury. "Tommy, get down from there right now!" Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "You'll get your clothes dirty!" "But Mom, I want to hear Grandma's story," Tommy protested, his lip quivering. "Now!" Zariah lifted Tommy from my lap, her movements rough enough to elicit a soft whimper from him. Then, her blazing eyes fixed on me, she declared, "I think it's time for you to leave." The dining room fell into an immediate deafening silence. Even the man who had been monopolizing the conversation with his business deals stopped mid-sentence, his fork hovering in the air. I felt 24 pairs of eyes boring into me, witnessing my profound humiliation. "Zariah, please," I began, my voice barely a whisper, the plea for civility dying on my lips. "It's Tommy's birthday." "Security!" she called out, her voice suddenly amplified, though no security was present. "Could you please escort this woman out? She's disturbing our family dinner." Marcus stood slowly, his face a ghostly pale. "Zariah, that's my mother." "Your mother," she sneered, each word dripping with venom, "doesn't belong at a table with decent people. Look at her, Marcus. She's embarrassing you, embarrassing us, embarrassing our son." I don't remember standing up. I don't remember walking to the door. I only remember the thunderous beat of my own heart echoing in my ears and the crushing weight of 20 stares following me out. At the threshold, I turned back once, a flicker of desperate hope in my chest that Marcus would meet my gaze, that he would say something, do something. He was staring fixedly at his plate. The cool evening air struck my face as I stepped outside, my hands trembling so violently I could barely find my car keys. As I fumbled inside my purse, the front door clicked shut behind me, a sound of definitive dismissal. Settling into my car, I caught my reflection in the rear-view mirror. A 68-year-old woman with slightly mussed silver hair from Tommy's enthusiastic hug, wearing her nicest dress that now felt like a tattered rag. I looked precisely like what Zariah had branded me, a poor, old woman who didn't know her place. But what Zariah didn't know, what none of them knew, was that tomorrow morning I would stride into the gleaming headquarters of Meridian Technologies. I would take the elevator to the very top floor and settle behind the imposing mahogany desk in the corner office. This was the same company where Zariah worked as a marketing manager, smugly believing she was climbing the corporate ladder with her sharp tongue and calculated cruelty. She had absolutely no idea that the woman she had just publicly humiliated was the founder and CEO of the very company that signed her paychecks. As I drove home through the quiet, darkened streets, my hands finally steady on the steering wheel, I made a firm decision. Zariah had sought to teach me about knowing my place. Tomorrow, I would teach her about knowing hers. I arrived at Meridian Technologies at 6:30 in the morning, 2 hours before my usual time. The building stood silent in the early dawn light, its glass facade reflecting the pale sky like a mirror. I had built this company from nothing 35 years ago, back when people scoffed at the idea of a woman starting a tech business. Now, it proudly employed over 2,000 people across 3 states. Miguel, the security guard, looked visibly surprised to see me so early. "Morning, Mrs. Morrison. You're here bright and early today." "Couldn't sleep," I told him, which was the honest truth. I had spent most of the night replaying every excruciating moment from dinner, every cruel word, every pitying glance from the other guests. My office occupied the entire northeast corner of the 42nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the city, but this morning, I barely glanced at it. Instead, I went straight to my computer and pulled up the employee database. Zariah Mitchell Morrison, Marketing Manager, Digital Campaigns Division, hired 18 months ago. I stared at her employee photo, that same condescending smile she had worn just last night when she'd called me a poor old woman. According to her file, she had impressed the hiring manager with her dynamic personality and innovative approaches to client engagement. Her salary was more than most people made in 2 years. I clicked deeper into her records, performance reviews, project assignments, colleague feedback forms. What I found made my stomach churn. 3 formal complaints had been filed against her in the past year, all from older employees. Margaret Chen, 61, from accounting, had complained that Zariah publicly humiliated her during a budget meeting, calling her methods outdated and suggesting she step aside for someone who understands modern business. The complaint was, regrettably, dismissed after Zariah claimed she was simply advocating for efficiency. Robert Williams, 58, from IT support, had reported that Zariah demanded he work overtime on her personal projects while berating him about his slow processing speed and inability to keep up with younger minds. Again, this complaint was dismissed after Zariah's supervisor vouched for her high standards. The third complaint came from Janet Rodriguez, 63, a custodial supervisor. Zariah had apparently complained to HR that Janet was unprofessional and couldn't understand basic instructions, after Janet didn't immediately move a meeting room cleaning to accommodate Zariah's last-minute schedule change. As a result, Janet had been transferred to the night shift. I leaned back in my chair, a cold, hard anger settling deep in my chest. This wasn't just about how she'd treated me. This was a clear pattern. Zariah deliberately targeted older employees, used her position to demean them, and shamelessly relied on the company's reluctance to deal with workplace conflicts to escape any consequences. My phone rang, jolting me from my grim thoughts. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. "Mom!" His voice was strained, utterly exhausted. "I'm so sorry about last night. Zariah she was really stressed about the dinner party. She didn't mean what she said." I closed my eyes. Even now, he was making excuses for her. "She called security to have me removed from my grandson's birthday dinner, Marcus. There was no security." "Mom, she was just emotional." "She humiliated me in front of 20 people. A long pause stretched between us. "I know. I should have said something. I'm sorry." His voice cracked slightly. "But you know how she gets when she's planning these events. Everything has to be perfect." Perfect. As if my mere presence somehow tainted their perfect, pristine life. "I need some time to think," I told him. "Of course, but Mom, maybe next time, if you could just dress up a little more? You know how important appearances are to Zariah's friends." After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. My son, my gentle, kind son, who used to defend injured birds and give his lunch money to classmates who forgot theirs, was now asking me to change who I was, to accommodate his wife's blatant cruelty. By 8, the office was bustling with activity. I watched through my window as employees filed into the building, riding elevators to their respective floors, settling into their workdays. Somewhere among them was Zariah, probably already complaining to colleagues about her difficult mother-in-law, who didn't know her place. I buzzed my assistant, Helen. She'd been with me for 15 years, starting as a secretary and diligently working her way up to executive assistant. She was also 62 years old, exactly the kind of employees Zariah seemed to enjoy targeting. "Helen, I need you to pull some personnel files for me," quietly. "Of course. Which employees?" "Start with the digital campaigns division. I want to see everything: performance reviews, project reports, internal communications. And Helen, I especially want to see any records involving interactions with older staff members." Helen paused. She'd worked with me long enough to recognize when something significant was brewing. "Should I ask what this is about?" "About?" "Not yet," I replied, a chilling certainty in my voice. "But I have a feeling we're going to be making some significant changes around here." An hour later, Helen returned with a stack of files that confirmed my gravest fears. Zariah's division shockingly had the highest turnover rate in the entire company, specifically among employees over 50. Exit interviews consistently revealed a disturbing pattern of complaints about ageist attitudes and a hostile work environment. Yet somehow, these critical reports had never made it to my desk. I found printed records of Zariah's emails, meticulously filed according to company policy. One particular exchange with a colleague made my hands tremble with righteous anger. "Can you believe they're making me work with Janet on the Morrison project? The woman can barely operate a smartphone. Why do we keep these dinosaurs around? They're just taking up space that could go to people who actually understand the modern workplace." The Morrison project, a highly successful campaign for a new client that Zariah had shamelessly claimed credit for, earning herself a substantial bonus. It was Janet Rodriguez, the 63-year-old custodial supervisor who had been transferred to night shifts, who had developed the initial concept during a brainstorming session that included support staff. I picked up my phone and dialed extension 4247 for human resources. "Jennifer speaking," a voice answered. "Jennifer, this is Sherry Morrison. I need to see you. In my office immediately, and please bring the organizational chart for the digital campaigns division." 20 minutes later, Jennifer sat across from my desk, her face pale as I calmly outlined everything I had discovered. "Mrs. Morrison?" she stammered. I had no idea the situation was this extensive. Some of these complaints should have been escalated to your office immediately. They should have been, I agreed, my voice steady. But they weren't, which tells me we have more problems than just one employee. However, right now, I want to focus on Zariah Mitchell-Morrison. Jennifer nodded nervously. What would you like me to do? I leaned forward, my decision solidifying into an unyielding resolve. I want her transferred immediately, today. To which department? Jennifer asked, her eyes widening with apprehension. I thought about Janet Rodriguez, forced to work the night shift because Zariah found her inconvenient. I thought about Margaret Chen, publicly humiliated for using methods that had worked successfully for decades. I thought about Robert Williams, compelled to work overtime on personal projects while being cruelly called slow and outdated. Food services, dishwashing. Jennifer's eyes widened further, almost comically. Mrs. Morrison, that's quite a significant demotion. She'll certainly file a grievance. Let her, I countered. Tell her it's part of a new company initiative to have management personnel understand all aspects of our operation. Tell her it's temporary, pending a restructuring of her division. And if she refuses? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only cold steel. Then she can find employment elsewhere. I'm sure there are plenty of companies that would appreciate her dynamic personality. After Jennifer left, I stood at my window, gazing down at the street 42 floors below. People moved like ants, each focused on their own small piece of the world, utterly unaware of the larger forces shaping their days. Tomorrow, Zariah would report to the basement cafeteria. She would put on a hairnet and wash dishes in industrial sinks, working alongside the very people she'd so casually dismissed as dinosaurs and obstacles. She would learn firsthand what it felt like to be looked down upon, to have her value questioned, to be treated as if she didn't matter. And she would do it all without ever knowing that the woman she'd humiliated last night was the one holding her future so firmly in her hands. I picked up my phone and dialed the cafeteria manager. There was important work to be done. The cafeteria in the basement of Meridian Technologies hummed with the constant, rhythmic noise of industrial dishwashers and food preparation. Steam billowed from massive sinks, where mountains of dishes were scrubbed and sanitized before being loaded into commercial washers. It was honest, essential work, the kind that kept a company running smoothly, yet it remained largely invisible to most of the people who directly benefited from it. I stood in the service corridor, disguised in a maintenance uniform I'd borrowed from the facilities department. At 68, I could easily pass for one of the older cleaning staff members. My silver hair was tucked neatly under a baseball cap, and I carried a clipboard, completing the illusion. Zariah had been here for 3 days. Through the kitchen service window, I watched her struggle awkwardly with the industrial spray nozzle. Her designer manicure was already chipped and ruined. She wore the standard issue hairnet and plastic apron, but her face bore an expression of barely contained rage that made several of her co-workers give her a wide berth. "This is absolutely ridiculous," she muttered venomously to Maria, the woman working beside her. "I have a master's degree in marketing. I was managing a 7-figure campaign portfolio. Now they have me washing dishes like some common what?" Maria interrupted her, her voice sharp and cutting. She was about 55, with calloused hands that bore the clear marks of years of hard, honest work. "You think this work makes us less than you?" Zariah's face flushed. "That's not what I meant. I just meant that I'm qualified for something better." "We're all qualified for something, honey," said Janet Rodriguez, who was preparing vegetables at the next station. I recognized her instantly from the files. The woman Zariah had complained about, who'd been unjustly transferred to the night shift. Janet didn't know that her tormentor was now standing just a few feet away, sharing her workspace. But there's dignity in any honest work. Zariah rolled her eyes, but only when Janet wasn't looking. Easy for her to say. She's probably been doing this her whole life. I felt my jaw clench. Even here, even reduced to washing dishes herself, Zariah couldn't resist looking down on others. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Mom, Zariah's going through a rough patch at work. Some restructuring thing. She's really stressed. Maybe we could have dinner this weekend? Just the three of us." I typed back, "I'll think about it." But I already knew my answer. Watching Zariah these past 3 days had shown me that her cruelty wasn't just reserved for family dinners. It was inherently who she was, woven into the very fabric of her character. On the 4th day, I decided to get closer. I entered the kitchen during the peak lunch rush, knowing the noise and controlled chaos would provide me with perfect cover. I approached the dish pit where Zariah was working, looking utterly defeated. Her once perfect blonde hair hung limp beneath the hairnet, and dark circles sagged under her eyes. "Excuse me," I said, deliberately roughening my voice and adding a slight accent. "I need to clean the floor around your station." Zariah barely glanced at me. "Whatever, just don't get in my way." I began mopping around her feet, positioning myself close enough to overhear her conversation with Louise, a young man who had been patiently trying to help her adjust to the grueling work. "I don't understand why they're making me do this," Zariah complained, scraping food remnants off a plate with unnecessary force. "It's probably that dried-up old hag from HR. She never liked me." Louise shook his head. "Jennifer's actually pretty fair. Maybe it really is just temporary, like they said." "Temporary, my ass!" Zariah snapped. "This is punishment for something. I just can't figure out what." She gestured around the vast kitchen with a soapy hand. "Look at this place. Look at these people. I don't belong here." "Hey," Louise said quietly, a note of rebuke in his voice. "These people work hard. They're good people." Zariah let out a bitter, derisive laugh. "Good people? Louise, wake up. These are the people who couldn't make it anywhere else. They're here because they don't have the skills or intelligence to do anything better." I stopped mopping, my grip tightening on the handle. Around us, the kitchen continued its rhythmic chaos, but I felt like I was standing in a bubble of complete silence, processing the venomous words I had just heard. "That lady over there," Zariah continued, nodding subtly toward Janet. "Probably never even finished high school. And that woman with the accent who was here earlier? Probably illegal. They should be grateful for any work they can get." Louise looked visibly uncomfortable. "Zariah, that's not true." Zariah's voice rose slightly, her condescension unwavering. "Look, I know it sounds harsh, but some people are meant to lead and some people are meant to follow. Some people are meant to create value, and some people are just maintenance. Just maintenance." As if the people who kept the company running, who ensured that employees like her former self could focus on their important work, were somehow less than human. I resumed mopping, moving methodically around the kitchen, listening to Zariah continue her scathing commentary on her coworkers. She criticized Maria's English, called Louise naive for defending the older workers, and made snide remarks about Janet's appearance. "The worst part," she said as she rinsed a stack of plates with a dramatic sigh, "is that my mother-in-law probably loves this. She's probably sitting in her little apartment, laughing about how her successful daughter-in-law got knocked down a peg." My blood ran cold. Even here, even while suffering the very consequences of her own actions, she was consumed by thoughts of how to blame others. "Your mother-in-law?" Louise asked, a hint of confusion in his voice. Oh, she's this pathetic old woman who thinks the world owes her something just because she's old. She showed up to my son's birthday party dressed like she was going to a garage sale. Embarrassed my husband in front of all our friends. I had to ask her to leave. The way she spun the tale, she was the victim, the wronged party. There was no mention of calling security, no acknowledgement of the profound humiliation she'd inflicted. In Zariah's skewed version of events, she was simply a woman protecting her family from an embarrassing relative. She sounds difficult, Louise said diplomatically. She's a bitter old woman who's jealous of what we've built, Zariah replied, her voice laced with contempt. She spent her whole life doing manual labor, and she can't stand that her son married someone with class, someone with education. She wants to drag us down to her level. Manual labor. Like what she was doing right now? Like what the people around her did every single day with dignity and pride. I finished mopping and began to leave, but Zariah's voice stopped me one more time. You know what the really sick part is? My husband actually feels sorry for her. He thinks I should apologize for protecting our family from embarrassment. Can you believe that? As I walked away, I heard Louise say quietly, Maybe you should talk to her. Family's important. Zariah's laugh was sharp and cold. Family? Real family doesn't show up looking like they just crawled out of a trailer park. Real family understands social boundaries. I made it to the service corridor before my hands started shaking uncontrollably. I leaned against the cool wall, removing the baseball cap and running my fingers through my silver hair. 3 days of washing dishes, of seeing how the other half lived, of working alongside the very people she'd previously dismissed, and she'd learned absolutely nothing. If anything, she had only doubled down on her ingrained prejudices. That evening, Marcus called again. Mom, I'm really worried about Zariah. This job situation is really getting to her. She comes home exhausted and angry every day. What does she say about it? I asked, already knowing the answer. She thinks someone at her company is targeting her. She's convinced it's some kind of discrimination. Maybe because she's young and successful? He paused. She asked me to call you. Actually, she wants to apologize for the other night. I almost laughed aloud. Zariah wanted to apologize, not because she felt genuine remorse, but because she desperately needed allies. She was looking for someone to blame for her humiliating situation, and she'd realized that burning bridges with family might not be strategically wise after all. Tell her I'm not ready for that conversation yet, I said. Mom, please, she's really struggling. Marcus, I said gently, has Zariah told you what her new job involves? Some kind of cross-training program, learning different aspects of the business, he replied, his voice uncertain. Cross-training program, not washing dishes, not working alongside the people she'd spent months belittling. Even to her own husband, she couldn't admit the humbling truth of her situation. I see, I said. Well, I'm sure she's learning a great deal. Lot. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, thinking about the woman I'd observed for 3 days. Tomorrow, I would reveal myself. Tomorrow, Zariah would learn that the pathetic old woman she'd so cruelly humiliated held her future firmly in her hands. But first, I wanted to see how she would react when she realized that everything she thought she knew about power and position had just turned upside down. I arrived at the office earlier than usual on Friday morning. My decision had crystallized during a sleepless night. Watching Zariah for nearly a week had confirmed what I'd long suspected. She wasn't learning empathy from her experience in the kitchen. She was, instead, learning only resentment. Helen looked up as I entered, noting the determined set of my shoulders. "What can I do for you today, Mrs. Morrison?" "I need you to arrange a meeting," I stated calmly. "Zariah Mitchell Morrison, my office, 10 a.m. I paused at my door. "And Helen, make sure she comes up in the main elevator. I want her to walk through the executive floor." At exactly 10, Helen's voice came through the intercom. "Mrs. Morrison, your 10 I was here." "Send her in." I turned my chair to face the window, my back to the door, as I heard the hesitant footsteps on the plush carpet of the executive floor. Zariah's reflection appeared in the glass of the window. She looked tired, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her designer clothes replaced with the more casual attire appropriate for kitchen work. "Excuse me." Her voice carried that familiar tone of barely controlled irritation. "I was told someone wanted to see me about my transfer. I don't know why they sent me to the executive floor. There's obviously been some mistake." I swiveled my chair around slowly, allowing the recognition to dawn in her eyes. The change in her expression was remarkable. Confusion melting into shock, shock crystallizing into utter horror. "Hello, Zariah." Her mouth opened and closed several times before any sound emerged. "You? What are you? How did you get in here?" "I walked in through my private entrance, just like I do every morning." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Please sit down. We have a lot to discuss." She remained standing, her face cycling through emotions like a slot machine. Disbelief, anger, fear, and then a flicker of something that might have been calculating. "This is some kind of joke. You can't be the CEO and founder of Meridian Technologies." "I'm afraid I am." I completed her thought, my voice even. "Have been for 35 years. In fact..." Zariah sank into the chair as if her legs had suddenly given out beneath her. "But at dinner, you said you worked for a cleaning company." "I said I owned a business," I corrected, leaning back in my chair, studying her face. "You assumed it was a cleaning company. People often see what they expect to see, don't they?" She was quiet for a long moment, her mind clearly racing to process this unimaginable turn of events. When she spoke, again, her voice had undergone a noticeable change. It was softer, imbued with a hint of the practiced charm she had used to climb the corporate ladder. "Mrs. Morrison, I had no idea who you were. If I had known, I would have treated me differently," I interrupted. "That's interesting. So, your behavior toward me was based on your perception of my social status." Her face flushed, a mottled red spreading across her cheeks. "That's not what I meant." "What did you mean, exactly?" She straightened in her chair, seemingly deciding to try a different, more strategic approach. "I meant that there was obviously a misunderstanding. Family dynamics can be complicated, and sometimes people say things in the heat of the moment that they don't really mean." "Ah," I mused. "So, when you called security to remove me from my grandson's birthday party, that was just a heated moment?" "I was stressed about the dinner party. Everything had to be perfect and my presence made it imperfect." I pulled up her employee file on my computer screen, the soft glow illuminating my resolute expression. "Tell me, Zariah, do you remember Margaret Chen?" The sudden change of topic caught her completely off guard. "Who?" "Margaret Chen, 61-year-old accounting department. You publicly humiliated her during a budget meeting, suggested she step aside for someone who understands modern business." Zariah's eyes darted frantically around the opulent office, searching for an escape route that simply didn't exist. That was a professional disagreement. Sometimes you have to be direct in business." "What about Robert Williams? IT support. You made him work overtime on your personal projects while telling him he couldn't keep up with younger minds." I have high standards, she retorted, her voice rising slightly. And Janet Rodriguez? You complained that she was unprofessional because she couldn't immediately accommodate your last-minute schedule changes. She was transferred to the night shift because of your complaint. Zariah's carefully constructed composure finally began to crack, thin fissures appearing in her mask. I don't understand what this has to do with anything. Those were legitimate workplace issues. I turned my computer screen towards her, displaying the damning list of formal complaints filed against her. 3 formal complaints about age discrimination in 18 months, all dismissed because your supervisor believed you were simply maintaining high standards. Because I was, she insisted, though a tremor was now audible in her voice. Were you maintaining high standards when you told Louise that the people in the kitchen are there because they don't have the skills or intelligence to do anything better? The color drained from her face, leaving her ashen. You were... Every day this week, I confirmed, my voice unwavering. Listening to you dismiss hard-working people as maintenance, watching you learn absolutely nothing from your experience except how to blame others for your situation. She stood up abruptly, her mask finally slipping completely, revealing raw anger. This is entrapment! You can't spy on employees! I can observe the workplace culture of my own company, I corrected, my gaze piercing. What I found was an employee who systematically targets older workers, who believes social status determines human worth, and who fundamentally lacks the basic empathy required for true leadership. You're doing this because of the dinner! The accusation burst out of her, raw and desperate. This is personal revenge! I stood as well, moving to the massive window that overlooked the sprawling city. Do you know what I built this company on, Zariah? The idea that innovation comes from respecting every perspective, that wisdom has many forms, and that a person's value isn't determined by their age or background. I turned back to face her, my gaze unwavering. You represent everything I've spent my entire career fighting against. So, what happens now? Her voice was barely a whisper, thin and fragile. Are you going to fire me? That depends on you. A flicker of hope ignited in her eyes. What do you mean? You have a choice. You can continue working in the kitchen, learning what it means to be treated the way you've treated others. Maybe, eventually, you'll develop some understanding of how your actions affect people. And the other option? You can resign today. I'll provide a neutral reference that mentions your marketing skills without detailing the reasons for your departure. She stared at me for a long moment, her mind visibly racing, weighing her options, calculating every angle. Finally, she spoke, and her words revealed everything I needed to know about her character. This is blackmail. You're using your position to force me out because I didn't know who you were. I'm giving you an opportunity to leave with your dignity intact. My dignity? Her voice rose, laced with incredulity and anger. You had me washing dishes for a week. You humiliated me. I gave you the same treatment you've given to employees under your supervision, I stated calmly. The difference is, they had no choice. You do. Zariah moved toward the door, then turned back, her face twisted with a bitter anger. Marcus will hear about this. He'll know what kind of person his mother really is. Marcus will hear the truth, yes, I confirmed, my voice firm. He'll learn that his wife has been systematically bullying older employees, and that she called security to remove his mother from his son's birthday party. She froze, her hand gripping the door handle. He'll also learn, I continued, that when given the opportunity to take responsibility for her actions and grow as a person, she chose to blame others and play the victim. You're destroying my marriage, she cried, desperation in her voice. "Your marriage is not my responsibility, Zariah. Your character is." She stood there for another fraught moment, her chest rising and falling with rapid, shallow breaths. When she finally spoke again, her voice was cold and calculated, devoid of any genuine emotion. "I choose the kitchen. I'll stay in the kitchen, and I'll prove that this is all about your petty revenge. Marcus will see through this eventually." I nodded slowly, a profound weariness settling over me. "Very well. Report to the cafeteria Monday morning. Same time, same station." After she left, I sat back down at my desk, feeling older than my 68 years. I had hoped that revealing the truth would shock her into genuine self-reflection, that she might choose to use this as an opportunity for growth. Instead, she had chosen defiance and delusion. She would return to the kitchen not to learn, but to merely endure. She would paint herself as the victim of a vindictive old woman, never acknowledging that her current, humiliating situation was the direct result of her own cruelty. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Can we have lunch today? Zariah has something she wants to tell you." I looked at the message for a long time before responding. "I'm afraid I'm quite busy today. Perhaps another time." Because I already knew what Zariah wanted to tell me. She wanted to confess her identity, to leverage our family connection to escape the consequences of her actions. She wanted to turn Marcus against me by painting herself as the victim of my unreasonable expectations. But that conversation would come on my terms, not hers. And when it did, Marcus would learn some uncomfortable truths about the woman he'd married and the mother he'd failed to defend. The reckoning was far from over. The call came on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after my confrontation with Zariah. Marcus's voice was strained, carrying the heavy weight of someone who had finally been forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. "Mom, we need to talk. All 3 of us." I set down my teacup, noting the tremor in his voice. "About what, specifically?" "About Zariah's job situation, about what happened at Tommy's birthday, about everything." He paused, and I could hear muffled voices in the background. "Zariah, coaching him, no doubt." "She told me who you really are." "And how do you feel about that?" A long silence, thick with unspoken emotion. "Confused, angry. I don't understand why you didn't tell me you owned the company where she works." "You never asked what kind of business I owned, Marcus. You assumed, just like she did." "That's not the point, Mom. The point is that you've been manipulating her employment, punishing her because of personal family issues." I closed my eyes. Even now, even knowing the truth, he was defending her. "Is that what she told you?" "She told me you've been making her wash dishes for weeks as some kind of revenge. That's not the mother I know." "Then perhaps you don't know me as well as you think," I stated calmly. "Just like you don't know your wife as well as you think." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means we should have this conversation in person. Tonight. My apartment. 8 miles." They arrived 15 minutes late. Zariah had clearly spent time preparing. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and her clothing carefully chosen to project an image of professional competence undermined by personal persecution. Marcus, in contrast, looked utterly exhausted, caught helplessly between 2 women he was supposed to love, but clearly didn't fully understand. I served coffee in my small living room, the same modest space where I'd lived for the past 10 years. The stark contrast between this apartment and their sprawling suburban home was not lost on any of us. "Mom," Marcus began, settling onto my worn sofa. "Zariah has told me some disturbing things about what's been happening at her work." "I'm sure she has," I replied, remaining standing, my hands clasped behind my back. What exactly did she tell you? Zariah leaned forward, her expression a careful blend of feigned hurt and steely determination. I told him that you've been using your position to humiliate me. That you transferred me to the worst job in the company as punishment for a family disagreement. A family disagreement? I repeated the phrase slowly, letting the weight of it hang in the air. Is that what you're calling it, Mom? Marcus interrupted, his voice laced with exasperation. Regardless of what happened at Tommy's birthday, using your business to settle personal scores isn't right. It's not like you. You're right. It's not like the mother you know, but it's exactly like the CEO I've always been. I moved to the window, looking out at the glittering city lights. Tell me, Marcus, what do you know about Zariah's performance at work? She's successful, she's ambitious, she's building a career. She's filed 3 complaints against older employees in 18 months. She's created a hostile work environment for anyone over 50. She's systematically bullied people she considers beneath her. Zariah's careful composure cracked slightly. Those were legitimate professional concerns. You told Louise that the kitchen workers don't have the skills or intelligence to do anything better. You called them maintenance. I turned back to face them, my gaze steady. You said Janet Rodriguez probably never finished high school and suggested Maria might be illegal. Marcus's face went pale. Zariah, is that true? I was frustrated. People say things when they're under stress. The same way you say things when you're stressed about dinner parties? I asked quietly, my voice cutting through her flimsy excuse. The same way you called security to remove the Perona from your table. What does that mean? Marcus looked between us, confused. It means poor little woman in Spanish, I explained, my voice chillingly calm. It's what your wife called me before having me escorted out of your son's birthday party. The silence that followed was deafening, thick with unspoken accusations. Marcus stared at Zariah, his face cycling through a kaleidoscope of emotions I recognized from his childhood. The same look he'd worn when he was 7, and realized that Santa Claus wasn't real. You called my mother a poor little woman? Zariah's eyes darted frantically around the room like a trapped animal, seeking an escape. Marcus, you have to understand. She showed up looking like... I didn't know who she was. So that makes it acceptable? Marcus's voice was rising now, the careful control he'd maintained for years finally cracking. But it's okay to humiliate people if you think they're poor? But it's okay to throw my mother out of our house if she doesn't meet your standards. Marcus, please, you're not understanding. I'm understanding perfectly. He stood up, pacing to the far end of my small living room, his agitation growing with every step. I'm understanding that my wife threw my mother out of our house because she was embarrassed by her appearance. I'm understanding that she's been bullying older employees at work. I'm understanding that when Mom gave her consequences for her behavior, she ran home to paint herself as the victim. Zariah's mask finally slipped completely, revealing a raw, desperate fury. Your mother has been lying to you. She's been manipulating this entire situation to make me look bad. How? Marcus's question came out sharp as a blade. How has she been lying? She pretended to be a cleaning lady. She spied on me in her own company. Observing an employee who'd been the subject of multiple complaints, I interjected smoothly. Marcus turned to me, his gaze pleading for confirmation. Is that true, Mom? About the complaints? I nodded. 3 formal complaints in 18 months, all dismissed because her supervisor believed she was simply maintaining high Standards. Marcus looked back at his wife, and I could see the last vestiges of his illusions crumbling away. So, when you came home every night complaining about how unfairly you were being treated, about how someone was targeting you, you were actually facing consequences for your own behavior? Marcus, you don't understand what it's like in that corporate world. Sometimes you have to be tough. Tough? His voice broke, raw with disbelief and pain. You called my mother security, Zariah. You humiliated her in front of 20 people. You made our son watch his grandmother get thrown out of his birthday party. I was protecting our family's reputation. From what? Marcus roared, years of suppressed resentment finally pouring out of him. From my mother? From the woman who raised me, who worked 3 jobs to put me through college, who never missed a parent-teacher conference or a baseball game? You were protecting us from the most decent person I know. Zariah stood up, her face flushed with a desperate mixture of anger and panic. She's not the saint you think she is. Look where she lives. Look how she dresses. She's an embarrassment. The harsh slap of her words hung in the air like acrid smoke. Marcus stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. When he spoke again, his voice was eerily calm, chilling in its quiet resolve. Get out. What? Get out of my mother's apartment. Get out now before I say something I'll regret. Marcus, you can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. He moved toward the door, holding it open, his gaze unyielding. Go home. Pack your things. We'll talk about custody arrangements through lawyers. Zariah looked at me, her eyes wild with panic and a flicker of frantic calculation. This is what you wanted, isn't it? You wanted to destroy my marriage. I met her gaze steadily, my voice firm. I wanted you to learn that actions have consequences. I wanted you to understand that treating people with cruelty because you think they're beneath you is unacceptable. I wanted you to develop some basic human decency. Instead, you've destroyed everything. No, Zariah, I continued, my voice gaining strength. You destroyed everything. The moment you decided that my grandson was better off without his grandmother. The moment you chose cruelty over kindness. The moment you made Marcus choose between his wife and his conscience. She looked between Marcus and me one final time, a desperate search for something, anything, that might save her. Finding nothing, she grabbed her purse and stalked toward the door. This isn't over, she hissed, her voice thin with venom. Yes, I said quietly. It is. After she left, Marcus collapsed into the chair she'd just vacated, his head sinking into his hands. We sat in silence for a long, heavy time, the immense weight of 20 years of mistakes settling unspoken between us. I'm sorry, Mom, he finally whispered, his voice raw with pain. I'm so sorry for everything. I know you are. A gentle sigh escaped me. How long have you known about who she really is? I suspected from the beginning, but I hoped I was wrong, he confessed, his voice thick with regret. I hoped that maybe she would change, that maybe love would make her kinder. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and swollen. What happens now? Now you rebuild, I told him, my hand resting softly on his shoulder. You focus on being the father Tommy needs. You remember who you are underneath all the compromises you made. And Zariah? I thought about her options, resignation or continued humiliation in the kitchen of my company. Zariah will figure out her own path. She always has. Marcus nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the floor. Can you forgive me for letting her treat you that way? I moved to sit beside him on the sofa, taking his hand gently in mine. You're my son. There's nothing to forgive. But even as I said the words, I knew that rebuilding trust would take time. Some wounds heal quickly, others leave scars that change you forever. The reckoning had arrived, but the real work was just beginning. 6 months later, I sat in my office on a crisp autumn morning, reviewing the quarterly reports that showed Meridian Technologies' continued growth. The morning light streamed through my windows, casting long, familiar shadows across the mahogany desk where I'd made so many pivotal decisions over the years. Helen knocked softly and entered with my coffee and the morning mail. "Mrs. Morrison, there's a resignation letter on your desk from the Food Services Department." I knew before I even opened it. Zariah's elegant handwriting filled a single page. A formal resignation, effective immediately, citing personal reasons and pursuit of new opportunities. No acknowledgement of what she'd learned, no expression of remorse, no sign of growth, simply an exit strategy that would allow her to preserve whatever remained of her fragile dignity. I signed the acceptance form without hesitation. Some people learn from consequences, others simply endure them until they find an escape route. "Helen, please process this today and send a memo to HR. I want exit interviews to be mandatory for all supervisory positions going forward, no exceptions." The changes I'd implemented over the past 6 months went far beyond addressing one toxic employee. I'd restructured the reporting system so that complaints about workplace bullying came directly to my attention. I'd instituted sensitivity training for all management personnel, emphasizing empathy and respect. Most importantly, I'd promoted Janet Rodriguez to floor supervisor, a position where her wisdom and experience were finally valued as they should have been. Margaret Chen had returned to the day shift, with a commendation letter in her file. Robert Williams was now leading a crucial project to upgrade our IT infrastructure, his decades of experience proving invaluable. The company culture was changing, slowly but steadily, embracing the values it had been built upon. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, Mom. Are you free for lunch today? Tommy wants to show you something." The relationship with my son had healed gradually, like a bone that had been broken and needed time to grow strong again. The divorce had been swift. Zariah had moved back to her parents' house in another state, apparently deciding that starting over somewhere else was preferable to facing the consequences of her actions in a town where people knew the truth about her behavior. "Of course, the usual place?" I asked, a smile touching my lips. "Actually, Tommy wants to have a picnic in the park. He's been practicing something for you." An hour later, I spread a blanket under a sprawling oak tree. While Tommy raced around the playground, his laughter echoing across the grassy expanse. Marcus looked healthier than he had in years, the constant tension finally gone from his shoulders. "Mom, watch this," Tommy called out, hanging upside down from the monkey bars with the fearless confidence that only 5-year-olds possess. "Be careful, sweetheart," I called back, my heart swelling with the simple, profound joy of being allowed to worry about him again. Marcus settled beside me on the blanket, unpacking sandwiches from a paper bag. "He asks about you every day. When is Grandma coming over? Can Grandma teach me to bake cookies? Can Grandma tell me the princess story?" "And what do you tell him?" I asked, a gentle smile on my lips. "That Grandma is busy building castles and slaying dragons." He smiled then, the first truly genuine smile I'd seen from him in years, a light of genuine happiness returning to his eyes. "He's decided you're the most powerful person he knows." I laughed, watching Tommy navigate the playground equipment with boundless determination. "Smart boy. Too smart sometimes." "Last week, he asked why Mommy moved away." Marcus sighed, the brief moment of lightness fading. I didn't know what to tell him. This was the hardest part. protecting a child's innocence while maintaining honesty. "What did you say?" I told him that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes mean they have to live in different places for a while. Marcus pulled out juice boxes, his movements careful and deliberate. He asked if she was coming back, and I told him I didn't know. "Is that terrible? Should I have been more definitive?" Reached over and squeezed his hand, offering comfort and understanding. "You told him the truth in a way he could understand. That's all any parent can do." Tommy ran over, breathless and glowing with excitement. "Grandma, come see the castle I built in the sandbox." I let him pull me toward his creation, an elaborate structure of sand and sticks that would have made any architect proud. As I admired his intricate work, I noticed other families around us. Grandparents pushing swings, parents chasing toddlers, the beautiful, chaotic symphony of ordinary life unfolding. This was what I'd been fighting for. Not revenge, not mere vindication, but the quiet, undeniable right to be an integral part of my grandson's world. The right to exist without apology, to be valued for who I was, rather than dismissed for who I wasn't. That evening, as Marcus and Tommy drove away, I stood in my small apartment, looking at the photos that covered my walls. Pictures of Tommy at various ages, Marcus graduating from college, holiday celebrations from before Zariah entered our lives. But there were new photos now too. Recent ones of Tommy and me baking cookies, building blanket forts, reading stories, a life beautifully reclaimed. My phone buzzed with a text from Louise, the young man from the kitchen who'd become an unexpected friend and ally. "Mrs. Morrison, wanted to let you know that Maria's grandson graduated high school today, first in his family to finish. She wanted to thank you for the scholarship program you started." I smiled warmly, typing back, "Give her my congratulations. Hard work deserves recognition." The scholarship program had been my latest initiative, funding education for the children and grandchildren of long-time dedicated employees. People like Maria, who'd spent 20 years ensuring that Meridian Technologies ran smoothly, deserved to see their families thrive and rise. Another text arrived. This one from Janet Rodriguez. "Night shift supervisor position opened up in Building B. Interested in applying? Could use a reference from someone who knows my work ethic." I laughed out loud, a genuine, joyful sound, typing back, "I might know someone who could help with that." As the sun set over the city, I made myself a simple dinner and settled onto my couch with a book. The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't the oppressive silence of isolation. It was the comfortable quiet of peace. I thought about Zariah, wherever she was now, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction in her downfall, but a profound sadness for the opportunities she'd squandered. She could have learned from her experience in the kitchen. She could have developed empathy, grown as a person, rebuilt her relationship with Marcus on a foundation of mutual respect rather than social climbing. Instead, she'd chosen to see herself as a victim, to blame others for consequences she'd brought entirely upon herself. Some people spend their entire lives running from accountability, never realizing that the true freedom they seek can only come from taking genuine responsibility for their choices. My phone rang one final time. Marcus again. "Mom, Tommy wanted me to call and tell you goodnight. He's worried you might be lonely." I heard my grandson's small voice in the background. "Tell Grandma that dragons are scared of the dark, so she should leave the lights on." "Tell him I'll leave the lights on," I said, smiling warmly. "And Marcus, thank you." "For what?" "For choosing to see the truth when it mattered most." After we hung up, I did indeed leave a small light on in the kitchen. Not because I was afraid of dragons, but because Tommy worried about me. And being worried about, truly, genuinely worried about, was a simple privilege I'd almost lost forever. I settled into bed that night, my mind drifting to thoughts about power. Not the superficial kind that comes from corporate titles or social status, but the profound kind that comes from truly knowing your worth and refusing to accept anything less. The kind that allows you to stand up for yourself and for others, even when it's difficult. The kind that comes from choosing dignity over convenience, truth over comforting lies. Zariah had thought she understood power. She'd believed it came from putting others down, from climbing social ladders, from marrying into a family she considered beneath her true aspirations. She'd tragically mistaken cruelty for strength and manipulation for intelligence. But real power, the kind that lasts, the kind that builds rather than destroys, comes from lifting others up. It comes from using your position to protect those who cannot protect themselves. It comes from understanding that every single person has inherent value, regardless of their age, their accent, their education, or their job title. I'd built Meridian Technologies on those very principles 35 years ago, and I would defend them until my last breath. For as long as I drew breath, the very next morning, I would rise and return to my office, ready to continue the vital work of building a company culture based on unwavering respect and inherent dignity. I would meticulously review applications for the scholarship program, thoughtfully approve promotions for deserving employees, and diligently ensure that the mistakes of the past could never, ever be repeated. But tonight, I simply allowed myself to sink into the deep, peaceful sleep of someone who had fought for what truly mattered and ultimately won. Not through petty revenge or vindictive retaliation, but through the quiet, persistent application of consequences and the unwavering belief that everyone, regardless of their station, deserves to be treated with basic human decency. I had reclaimed my rightful place, both within my family and within my company. I had protected others from the very kind of cruel treatment I had endured. And most importantly, I had shown my grandson that his grandmother was, indeed, powerful. Not because she possessed the ability to hurt people, but because she consistently chose to help them. That, I realized, was the only kind of power worth having. The kind that built lasting legacies instead of tearing them down. The kind that created light instead of darkness. The kind that let you sleep peacefully at night, knowing you had done the right thing. Now, as you've listened to my journey, I'm curious about your thoughts. What would you have done if you found yourself in my place? Have you ever navigated a similar situation where you had to stand up for yourself or for others against prejudice or disrespect? Please share your own experiences and insights below. And in the meantime, I've made sure to share 2 other tales from my life, stories that have deeply resonated with many, and I promise they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until the very end.